We are lighting the candle, a world that works. I've been saying that a lot lately. And I'm Bill Correll, and with me is my major buddyette and conversational partner, Jan Jeremias. And those of you who are tuning in for the first time, we are doing things just a little bit different this year. And Jan and I are kind of establishing how the conversations and the kinds of tones of what we're discussing together, might look. And in the meantime, we're also in the process of inviting some folks to come and join us as guest podcasters. So if you have anyone that you think you'd like to listen to or you'd like to hear more specifics from, by all means, let us know. But let's just start off by how you doing, Jan?
Oh, I'm okay, Bill. How are you?
I'm ecstatic.
Oh, good.
My magnolias in the back look absolutely fantastic. I have
Mm-hmm.
the white star magnolias that have been in full bloom for a week. And the neat part of it is last year they dumped all their petals within 3 or 4 days because of the rapid changes in weather. And we've had a little bit more moderate weather for that period of time. And now my pink ones are coming out and my pink flowering dogwoods are coming out too. So this is my time of year. I like the rebirth. I like the newness of all of it.
You like the spring? Yeah, I mean, I've always I don't know. I mean, I like the spring, but I also really love the fall. I've always really loved the fall. Could be because I'm a fall baby.
Right?
Um, but also I just love the colors on a good when the trees start to change on a good like if we've had great weather for it. It's just yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination of the right kind of sun, the right kind of water, and then the right kind of coolness over a gradually, sort of diminishing period of time as opposed to a real cold snap.
Right.
When we get those, it makes all the oaks turn brown, and it makes all the maples drop all their leaves all at once. So I'm with you. I like those two seasons. The one that comes in between, not the summer, but that other one, um, I can do without that. The snow is really wasted on me. It actually pains me to say that word out loud, but we haven't had that much snow in the last 2 years, so I'm kind of counting my blessings there.
Well, we had a few good storms this year, and I was actually really happy. I do love the snow. My philosophy around the snow is if it's going to be cold, it might as well snow because otherwise, cold weather just seems kind of useless to me. I'm just like if it's going to snow and it's pretty, and I don't really like. I love looking at it. I love I love the quietness. I was talking to somebody over the weekend about that, like you know experience I had years ago at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, walking in Manhattan in the middle of a pretty good snowstorm. And the fact that it was really quiet and everything is really blanketed and you still have the lights and, was just spectacular. And
You
so
just took me back.
it just took you back right there.
Yeah, back in the 90s. I spent a lot of time down in Manhattan, the Wall Street area, also Fifth Avenue. And I used to stay at this really marvelous hotel that was up somewhere around Madison and 38th, I want to say. Right around, there's a place called, of all things, in New York City called Rubens.
Oh,
And
yeah, I
anyway,
know.
have you been there?
No, I don't think so, but I know exactly where you're talking about because
Right. Yeah. So
I
it's
mean, I actually went to when I was in college, my dorm was on 34th between Park and Madison,
there you go. And
diagonally across from B. Altman's at the time.
yes. Yeah. But those are two really wonderful streets to drive on as well, Park and Madison.
I always loved that whole area. Walking that whole area is fantastic, and
Yeah.
the city is very walker friendly. And I always say it's like the easy. People always complain about it, but I always say it's the easiest city in the to get around because it's a grid, and so it's so easy to navigate. Like
Yeah.
which direction everything is going in. At least once you get above and the numbers and everything. I mean, downtown is a little more complicated because it's named streets, but um, I always found Boston so confusing for that reason. With all these
100%. I mean, you get spoiled rotten when you go to a place like Salt Lake City or Phoenix or Denver because they go on for 30 miles with the same name of the street, into different little boroughs and cities and stuff.
Yeah.
But Boston, forget about it. You're not supposed to know your way around. It's a closely guarded secret there on a need to know basis.
Yeah, and I always felt that way. It was always odd to me. I remember one of the first major cities I went to outside of New York for work was Phoenix. And I
Yeah,
just remember, like, their numbers or whatever. It's like you will have a building and then you'll have another building like 2 or 3 miles down the road. And I was like downtown, and that was downtown. And I was used to Manhattan where everything is very condensed.
exactly. 60
And
and 80-foot, 80-story buildings, everywhere. And Phoenix is like the tallest ones are like 20 stories,
right, and they're far apart from each other. And I
Exactly.
remember the same thing when I went to Salt Lake City for the first time, and they're like, they'll say, "Oh, it's 3 blocks," but 3 blocks is like 4 city blocks every block, so it was a lot further. And, if you're coming off Manhattan where you know how much it's 20 blocks to a mile. So, so
Exactly.
yeah, so reminiscing about our times in different cities.
Well, the other thing that I'm remembering too was going back to the days of Christmas time in the city, and there were times when we had major snowstorms. And I know exactly what you're talking about, where it only seems like the only traffic on the street is just the taxi cabs and buses. Everything else is shut down, and occasionally there's different drivers and what have you. But the really neat part of that is then just walking down, looking at all the storefronts, going FAO Schwartz, Tiffany's, and walking by and seeing all of the Macy's front windows and all the little animated whatever the heck they are, and there's so much less of that going on today than there was even 25 or 30 years ago.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And I remember snowstorms literally. I mean, we walked down the middle of major streets like 34th Street and 57th and up
sure,
center or down the center of Fifth Avenue. It was like there were no cars on the road at all.
sure,
And at points, no buses. So it was always such a almost surreal experience because you're always so used to seeing people were out
yeah.
as the day went on. But in the beginning of the day, it was really quiet and there wasn't really a whole lot of going on. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like being in almost a fairyland kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just absolutely loved it. And you're right, it hasn't happened in a long time.
Well, the other thing too is that while you're speaking, and I'm thinking about how that skyline has changed so much. When you were a little girl, that was, the two tallest buildings in the city were probably Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building.
The Chrysler's actually my favorite. Always loved the Chrysler building. Um, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I remember going to the World Trade Center when I was little for like the first or second time or whatever, and wanting to go there because then you got to look at the Empire State Building, which was always super exciting as opposed to the vice versa. So always loved going to the World Trade Center
Sure.
because it was so much, you could see all the really beautiful buildings, but I always loved the Chrysler building. Um,
That styling is very, well, the Art Deco styling anywhere is really wonderful, but they took it to the max on that one.
that one, oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. And it was really, I mean, I grew up there basically. That's what I say anyway, because my grandmother lived in Manhattan. So I spent quite a lot of time there. So,
You
it was
know,
all.
Jan, I want to just ask you, what was your experience with all of the neighborhood restaurants? Because what I used to really enjoy in the early 19 to mid 1990s was every block had a half dozen of these little small restaurants that might only have 4 or 5 tables in it, and they would just turn things over, whether it was pizza or Italian food or Indian food, Thai food. If there are 60 different types of food that you could have in New York City, you would find half of them within 4 or 5, city blocks of each other, at least one. And then there'd be dozens everywhere, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when I was young, my grandmother lived on the Upper East Side. So, there were these few places that she would always go to. There was a place that was like a diner, which she would go to like everywhere. So we walk in and it's like the owner knew her name and they knew my name. And, you know, I think I remember the name, and we used to call him Uncle because he was like, because we were there all the time. And
Right.
then certain areas were known for particular types of cuisine. Like you did still have Chinatown and Little Italy, which were really known
Yes.
for the Lower East Side, which was still, like Delhi, and then the Essex Street Market, which, you know, which was like a food and meat market in the middle of Manhattan.
Right.
And we would go to as kids and everything. And then other areas which were just very much known for specific, cuisines and everything. And so I just, I remember that. And I remember, I remember like, not having, I remember my grandmother wanting to take us for Chinese food, and us not wanting to go because we didn't, wasn't a cuisine at that time we grew up eating or whatever. And I think we were like, it's okay, kind of thing. Not, then later on becoming much more adventurous, and just, really enjoying the fact that you know, you get Thai food and Chinese food and Indian food. And, then the area that became certain, like, areas that became known for certain cuisines as time went on. But yeah, it was always fun. It was also really fun for people watching. It was like anything went, loved that. Like,
Yeah. Well, one of the things I loved, going back to the first one that I mentioned, the um, when you consider how many times people have made Reubens all over the world since whenever that was, you can get a corned beef Reuben, you can get a pastrami Reuben. You and I both know that the corned beef Reuben it's the real one. And what was neat about that little deli on the inside, people would come in there and it was the best of the best, they said, of anything that you could want. And it didn't matter if it was whitefish or if it was, it just didn't matter. All of it was really, really good. And people would come in, they'd get all of their own ingredients and go back to their offices and make their own sandwiches, and the fresh bread and all the rest of that stuff. I always ate there. And most of the times I did get a Reuben, although there were a few times that I had something else. But it was my go-to place, and they made it on this big, almost like sourdough bread, and it had swirls in it, light and dark. And was just really, Jewish rye, I think is what they called it, but it was really, really good.
yeah, I mean, pretty much my whole child, I was always kosher, so we never ate in play. We didn't eat out meat in restaurants that weren't kosher restaurants. So,
Right.
and New York had a lot, so it was a great place. We would get excited because normally we didn't get to go out and eat that kind of stuff. But I just remember like the bakeries on the Upper East Side. There was a great that had the best like raisin pumpernickel bread that was
Oh
just
boy.
like you know was amazing. And and just knowing where certain areas like you know just I don't know, it was fun. And even back then it was just
Yeah.
so the neighborhoods were different for different depending on where you were from.
And what about the street vendors?
Oh, pretzels, the best street pretzels. And during, like you were talking about, like the winter, roasted chestnuts on the streets. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's to the out of towners, those street vendors and the hot dogs and the 4-day-old chili and all of that stuff. New Yorkers walk by and they go, "Good luck to you." And then but there's always be 4 or 5 people deep waiting to get something, but the pretzels were fantastic.
Oh my gosh, the pretzels were amazing. That's probably the thing I remember the best as far as being a kid. That and maybe like something like ices,
Yeah.
you know. But otherwise, it was the pretzels, the hot pretzels that were just trying to think.
Soft and chewy and big pieces of salt on them and
Huh?
little mustard and, kind of a mess, but really good, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So so if you're listening at home, no, we don't know what we're gonna talk about today. We're just kind of like getting into the mode here with spring has finally sprung. It's 73 degrees at my home today. Can you imagine that, Jan?
No, I actually, um, yeah, I haven't. I mean, I was out earlier for, a walk with Tonka. So I went out earlier, but I've been in meetings now and I'm just watched somebody go by behind me who was wearing a short sleeve shirt. And I'm sitting there going, what's the temperature outside? Because the house doesn't feel that warm because the
Yeah,
house is still kind of cool. So I'm like looking, I'm like, oh, okay. So, but there is that element of, yeah, of spring and everything is springing. That's for sure. My allergies would tell you that.
it's true. It's been a real interesting season as far as that goes. I mean, um, constantly with the runny nose and eyes and what have you. However, with that said, we've been getting a significant amount of rain too. And how
Mhm.
I know, we will have a forecast that shows no rain for 7 or 8 days. And I look at my wife and I go, guaranteed by this time tomorrow, it will have rained. And it does, So yesterday was supposed to be like 9 days with no rain, like at least until next Thursday. And then it rained overnight. So, but everything's so green and lush.
But we had rain yesterday afternoon
Yep, we did.
because I actually had to run, to Nyack, which is one of my Nyack, New York, which is one of
Yep.
my favorite towns. I love Nyack, and I went to make a Shiva call actually, so at a friend's, house. So I drove into Nyack and I was like, "Oh my gosh," and on the way home, it was raining. So it did rain yesterday. It was like
So I have a question for you.
mhm.
Um, with everything that's been going on and all of the work that we've been doing and all the people that we've been talking to, do you have any go-to hobbies?
Um, Not something I can say I do on a regular basis. Like I'm starting to do more on a regular basis. I would say one, yeah, I wouldn't say a hobby like, I don't know. I think of hobbies as being much more um, like your go to, something you do all the time
Right.
or every free moment that you have. And I don't really know that I have that anymore, but I'm trying to carve out time to do certain things, like a lot more art or crafting type
Mhm.
stuff. So I'm really love that. I love that. And so I'm starting to do a little bit more of that or just making sure at least once a month, let's say, I do some sort of workshop or something, art class, like something which is kind of feeding another part of my soul, Um, so that's a yeah, just feeding a different part of my soul or tends to help me connect into a different part of myself that I don't normally use. Let's say on a daily basis. I mean, I'm very creative in what I do, but still, it's still taps into a different part of myself because I
Right.
do think it's really important.
Well, yeah, self-expression and joy are they're accessible at any moment, and part of the thing that really gives you access to that is to have a familiar activity that you really enjoy doing, that you lose yourself in. Like time goes by and you just don't notice the clock, and before you know it, an hour or 2 hours has gone by.
Mhm.
I have a lot of those kinds of activities, but most of them come down to being in conversation with friends.
Mhm.
um, Lately, what I've been doing, which I think is not only fun, but it has its effect on me physically. I have started doing yoga, and I'm it's a practice that I'm doing every day. It's a video guided yoga program that increases intensity and the duration over a period of about 45 days. So it's starting off very light, mostly just stretching, mostly just starting, to move the core around a little bit. And I really enjoy it because yeah, and then I've got a reminder set on my calendar at 9 o'clock every single morning, and I get up, I go and I get my chair, and I, take the iPad and I make it work on the TV and the Apple TV so that it's full size, full screen, and I can face it. Um, and then I just text my wife afterwards and say, yoga is done for today.
Mm. Impressed. Very cool. I mean, I think that as the weather gets nice, I in the winter I tend to spend a lot more time inside. So I've been starting to get out and walk a lot more, which is always feeds me in a different way. And so I've been very much, doing that. And so, which also serves the purpose of, helping me to move a little bit more than I might, have become a little bit more sedentary in the winter.
Sure.
So that's the other plus of doing it. But there's something about a hobby. And I think about it because I think about it for my dad because my dad used to have a lot of hobbies and he kind of gave them up. And I think they're just good as it's good to be interested in other things and to explore different things, especially as as you age, because I think it gives you, keeps you in touch with other people. If those are things like if you have a group that likes to do certain things, like my father was a stamp collector for many years and he used to go to meetings and stuff. And so he kind of gave that up. And I look at that as being not a positive thing. I think it's really good when we can keep things like hobbies going and things we're passionate about, um, kind of thing. I think it's just very healthy.
Well, see that I've been kind of playing with the whole notion of anything that I can schedule and do every day and really look forward to it. I can turn it into a hobby.
Hmm.
So the same thing is true for health related things. Like, for instance, intermittent fasting is just kind of a lifestyle for me now, and it's just something that I do on a regular basis. I feel very clear headed, a lot of energy, and I can actually feel that the toxins and the stuff that my body's not using anymore, that it's eliminating. It's getting rid
Hmm.
of. So with that said, there's that. There's also kind of like my broad spectrum nutritional endeavors. I love cooking, and I've kind of like taken food preparation and made that into a hobby as well. I
Hmm.
enjoy the shopping for the ingredients. I enjoy the whole preparation, like making things into something that's really kind of a special in terms of what's it going to taste like, what's it going to look like on the plate, and then I share that, both the if it's an involved thing, like when I do slow cooked meats, like beef ribs or something like that. It's an all day process. I started in the morning, and then I let it kind of marinate overnight, and then I put it in the oven the following day, and you take pictures of each step in the process of what I'm doing, up to and including what the ribs look like after they've cooked at 200 degrees for 7 to 9 hours. And so it's a transformational process. And the same thing works for making bread, uh, for making like chocolate chip cookies with all the ingredients in their packages, sitting on the counter, and then it goes into the bowl. And that's the thing about chocolate chip cookies. They don't look like very much while they're in the bowl. I mean, a lot of people will eat the dough and think that, well, that's good, we're done, or mix it in with ice cream or something like that. But when you put them into the oven, they transform into a completely different kind of a thing. They're almost like a butterfly coming out of a chrysalis, and
Mhm.
the smell, and then the taste, and then the melted chocolate, and it's just wonderful. It's a kind of a great thing to reward yourself with.
Yeah, for me, art is like that. And when I get creative with using my essential oils, and then, I have been known through the years to make stuff, from soaps to scrubs to lotions and things like that. And that gets very creative for me at times. So I've always loved doing that. And I remember I used to post a lot of recipes and show whatever, and all my friends would say to me, Jan, no one's doing that. No one's doing that. Like, no one's going to go to all that trouble. But it was always fun and it was creative. And I love combining stuff still. Like, I love combining aromas together and figuring out what's going to work well, what smells good, what smells really nice and would also has some sort of health benefit. That's so I always loved to do that. So, it's all to me just keeping life a little bit, I want to say, giving it a little bit of variety and pep, and just because otherwise I think life, I mean, for me, I get stuck in the mundane tasks that I need to do every day, and therefore the mundane, things that preoccupy my brain, as far as, personal business, whatever. And then life seems very heavy and not very joyful.
It can sometimes, right? And I'm sure the people that are listening, you folks at home, there's always something for you to be concerned about. And we are a culture of worry. It is the nature of people to be concerned about either the past that's incomplete or the future that's not here yet. Uh, and at the same time, if you take a practice, or in your case, I want to hear more about the making of soaps and the making of those different kinds of things, because that's fascinating to me. It's not something that I've ever done, but it sounds like you could have a whole lot of fun experimenting, with different ingredients and different smells, and maybe even different textures and densities, to the soap itself. But the whole idea of finding yourself engaged in something that you are so present to, everything else sort of like stops for a little while. That's
Hmm.
kind of neat.
No, it is. And I agree with you. There is something. When I used to paint, I used to get like that. Like, uh, when you know, I would just get so wrapped up in the painting that hours could go by and I was just in a zone. Um, as far as making soaps, was never very involved. To me, it was much more about the scent, and I would do different textures, like, you know, Um, Try to make them a little bit more creamy, try to make them like, let's say more like a glycerin type soap where, and the different purposes. It was very much about aroma for me of what smells worked well together and what I was trying to, let's say, work with. I do have a few funny stories. Like I decided I was going to make body butter, and it's not very hard. And usually what happens is you melt it down and you kind of get it into a more solid form. And then they tell you it's almost like meringue that you whip it up to get it to be fluffy. And so I remember melting everything down and getting it all ready in the more solid form because you let it solidify.
Right.
And it's kind of like making spinach that you start out with a lot and then all of a sudden it's really, really little. And I remember looking at it and thinking to myself, like, that's not really a lot, like, whatever. But then when you whip it up, it like multiplies because it aerates it. So I
Yeah.
just remember, like, I made enough. I think I had body butter for a year because I was like, oh my God. I was giving it away to everybody. It was just like, oh my gosh, but I loved doing it because I got to do it as gifts. I would like give people gifts of stuff I made. It was a little bit, in some ways, it was very cost effective. And then another way was like giving a part of myself to people when I gave a gift, as opposed to just going into a store. It's kind of like baking for people. I love to bake for people. I
Sure.
don't eat it. And I just love baking. I always liked baking and baking for other people since I didn't eat it. It was like, oh, here, I'll bake, I'll bring, you can have some. So I always loved doing that. And I think I do agree with you. Cooking or baking is very creative. Uh, and I have always liked it. I grew up in the helping my grandmother, my mother, cook a lot. So it was always a very fun place to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing too, is and when we were growing up, um, there were a lot of mouths to feed, and primarily my mother concentrated on making sure there was enough food and that it tasted good, whatever it was, but it was never really too fancy, you know?
Mhm.
So if we had spaghetti, we had spaghetti with homemade meatballs. I don't remember ever having sausage when I was a kid. It was probably, my mother thought it was more money than it was worth, for that kind of a meal. And I don't think she was raised with spaghetti and meatballs or spaghetti and sausage. So the other thing that we had that was spaghetti like was what she called goulash. And now it's not like a Hungarian goulash with a white sauce or something like that. It's more along the lines of we've got tomatoes made with whole tomatoes. It's also made with some tomato paste. It's going to be also have ground hamburger, that's been cooked all the way through, and then the elbow macaroni, and then some other things. So she would make that pretty often. And then she had another thing that she used to make that was kind of egg noodles with a cheese sauce and tuna, or egg noodles and a cheese sauce and chicken. The chicken was my favorite. And if it was done right, there wasn't an awful lot of sauce. And then back in the day, my three favorite, um, I want to say Kraft was the company that made these dressings, but one was Green Goddess,
Mhm.
which I can't find anywhere anymore, and the other one was Creamy Onion.
Mm.
And if you remember, like, Thousand Island dressing was something that they kind of came out with. I think probably because so many people had handmade it at home to make Reubens with, right? So that dressing that goes on a Reuben turns out that it's pretty good on salads too. So Thousand Island dressing was always pretty good.
Yeah, I there were certain things I just remember, like my mother making and everything, and it was a mealtime was always, I don't know, it was always a good time. I think I look at it now as being something that's because I don't know that many people that have like mealtime anymore that are families. most of the people I know who have families, they have a lot of different activities they have to get their kids to, and so you know, I don't know how much they actually have like a supper time, which I think is really important, but I don't know how often it's, at least among the people I know, it's not done very often anymore.
Well, I guess that's part of you know, the way things go. Um, and it's almost like easier to have a habit of preparing the food and then sitting and watching television. It takes some real discipline and rigor. And one of the big things that we always did, we always had 8 of us sitting around the dinner table. And now some people might, like my dad would get home 5:30. On a rare occasion it would be later than that, but usually not. And when he walked through the door, my mom would have something, on the table within a half hour.
Mhm.
He wasn't quite ready to eat when he walked through the door, but by 6 or 6:30, that's when we would have dinner. And it was kind of cute. One year for Christmas, I got this reel-to-reel tape recorder. It was a little tiny plasticky looking thing, and so I was always recording different things. Well, I set it up to record while we were eating dinner.
Oh,
So
really? That's so
clank, clank. Oh, that's good. Oh, yum. Yeah. Clank, clank. And then I played it back for everybody after we were done eating. It was funny. We sat there and roared laughing.
Yeah, it always kind of, it was funny. But we ate like, pretty much at 5:30, like every day. My
Yeah.
father got home from work. And it was also the rare occasion where we didn't, and it was all like, it was, the whole family, the 5 of us. It was not even with, when we had stuff, like I remember, I took piano. So even when that happened, it was after dinner. But that mealtime was kind of like a sacred time. And it was very rare that anything interrupted that.
Yeah. Yeah. There were the odd kind of things that would happen every once in a while. If there was an event like a football game or
I was
something
going to
like
say, or
that.
there was a performance at school or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
where schedules would kind of be altered, but otherwise it was very consistent.
Agreed. Did you have like go-to meals? A couple times a month you'd have something, or once a week you'd have something?
Yes, yes. Hamburgers were big. I remember we'd have hamburgers. Um, we kept kosher in the house, so it was either dairy or meat. So was maybe like a spaghetti with a, or something, pasta or a spaghetti. Or my mother used to make something that was, our next door neighbors were Italian. So I remember she used to make manigots, which were just basically stuffed pasta, so that, let's say dairy. I think we had probably had fish like once a week. My father was a big fish eater, so loved fish. I don't think we particularly, but my mother did. I'm trying to think of what else we had. Um, yeah, and I mean, I don't remember eating that much meat besides for like hamburgers, meatloaf, but still ground meat. Like we didn't have, and then, there might have been soup. But generally very balanced, like, kind of thing. But yeah, mom had specific things she made. And, quite often, I would say at least a few. I don't think anything was, like, there was never that much that was like, I mean, I think we looked at like stuffed shells as being extravagant,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But I don't think there was anything that was like extravagant, but it was always very balanced. Like we always had a starch, we always had a vegetable, usually a salad, and some sort of protein. Like, I mean, that was just a given.
Yeah, 100%. With 8 of us, we rarely had steak.
Yeah.
It
I
was
mean,
hot dogs, hamburgers, couple of
chicken.
things that we used to do that were a lot of fun and we all looked forward to was we would have grinder night. Okay, so my mom would get a full pound of thin sliced salami and American cheese, and then she would chop up a bunch of lettuce and do the tomatoes, and we'd always have green pepper. So sometimes they would be salami grinders, and then it would just be salt and pepper and a little bit of oil and vinegar on it, and they were good. The uh, the bread that we could get for those sandwiches were fantastic back in the day. It's hard to find that kind of grinder bread at the supermarkets anymore, because it's not as good as what you get by going to a pizza restaurant or something. There's a big difference between it. In other words, the other thing that we did with grinders was she'd make her meatballs. She would work a whole afternoon. She'd make 100 of these meatballs, right? And
Mhm.
then cook them all up in the sauce, and we'd make meatball grinders. And so
Mm,
they'd have the melted cheese on them, and she always liked to put on slices of green pepper. And the other thing that was big on both of those kinds of grinders was the dried red pepper. The seeds
yeah.
that just give you a burst of hot flavor, when you bite into it, which was
Yeah, I
really
mean,
good.
my mother used to make certain things, and some of them were much more like, holiday for us. Like she used to make sweet and sour meatballs, and she used to make something else, which was a liver dish that my grandmother used to make, which was really good. Besides for chopped liver, because chopped liver was big, um, but chicken soup and everything like that. I mean, some of the stuff was much more like holiday oriented than during the week, but
Right.
she had my mother was a fantastic cook. So, and then on holidays we would have stuff like pot roast and, like things like that, much more like,
Yeah.
but during the week she didn't make that kind of stuff that much.
Yeah.
But it was much more with special occasions. And I think in some ways that was so nice because it like made the holiday time so exciting. Like because she would make different things than she normally made, that
Yeah.
it made them really, really, really special.
Yeah, I do hope that all of you are taking a trip down memory lane for yourself while we're speaking. And I think really the other thing that we're doing right now is we're interrupting the the need to be significant about any conversation. We're just kind of demonstrating to you that when two people get together, especially if they're good friends like Jan and I are, there's really no topic that we can't discuss with each other. And we've covered the bases. I mean, we've really talked about everything. We don't talk politics or world events all that often because, quite frankly, there isn't enough factual information, in my opinion, that we could ever really have any kind of a meaningful debate in terms of what's going on in the world. However, we can talk about what we think that's going on that's good. We can talk about those kinds of things that will give you a moment's respite from your workaday world and being stressed out, and where you can just sit down and have a cup of coffee and listen to a couple of buddies talk to each other.
Hmm. No, I think that's so true. And it's also just nice to, I think as you get older, sometimes holidays become very nostalgic. It's almost like, longing for this time with, I'm longing for when, you know, longing for something that isn't in
Yeah.
existence anymore. But in a way, like I love talking about those memories because they live on and it does remind me of times like, I used to, reminds me of like going to my grandmother's, who had a one bedroom apartment in Manhattan. Um, and we would go there for 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 the Jewish New Year and for Passover and everything. And how we would all fit in this, like, be the five of us, her and my great aunt in this one bedroom apartment, like, with one bathroom, for like a Jewish holiday or whatever. And, you know, my brothers and my grandmother, my parents would sleep in the living room. And I would sleep with my grandmother and my aunt and my grandmother and my like me and my brother would sleep or whatever between their beds or whatever. And I had a cot and I would sleep on that. And, you know, just it was the best, so
Yeah, and those were simple times, right? You
oh
and
my
I didn't have to have anything that was super fancy or cost money or anything. We just had something that interrupted the routine. And so there it would be like, it was out of the ordinary. And so it was kind of like an opportunity without knowing what we were doing. We were being present and mindful in a situation because of its newness and because of different family members that wouldn't be around normally or whatever it was, the taste of the food, or it just was a great time to be open and full of joy.
right. And I think going new places, like for me, I mean, like I said, I mean, I spent a lot of time. My grandmother lived in Manhattan, so I would go there. We would go there for Jewish holidays, and I remember walking around as a kid, you know,
Yeah.
and just being in that environment. And everything. I remember the biggest thing was parking when we got there, and we would circle around sometimes and circle around. And I remember like there being a spot on the opposite side, but we had to circle around. And my father would tell one of my brothers to get out and stand in the spot, so that it wasn't taken by the time he got back, around the corner again, like so it was just so much fun. And it does remind me, it really was in so many ways such simpler times.
In every way. If you stop and think about it, the stress that you and I felt growing up as children was about 95% social. It was a concern about how someone else was either doing, feeling, um, something that had been said, something that will be said. It was different than it is today. I don't recall, especially being a kid, if my parents had money problems, they kept it to themselves. It's something that we as children were never aware of. As far as we were concerned, we were completely happy with everything that we had until we went to one of our friends' houses, and then we find out that for Christmas they got 5 times as much as we did of all these different things because their grandparents were spoiling the what out of them. But for the most part, it just was a great life. It was a great childhood.
Well, I also remember, like, I remember, like, there was this awareness that of money and the fact that you didn't waste it, that that there was you didn't waste it, and that it was kind of not something that you watched and guarded, but something that was important and basically didn't grow on trees, like that kind of attitude. But
Right.
it wasn't like it wasn't like we wanted for anything that I can think of. Yeah, it did, there's always stuff you want, but I don't really think I looked at it like that to a great extent.
Yes.
Um, but there was value to it. Like
Sure.
there was value, and um I remember we still got to, we went camping, so we camped. So we got to travel that way because we did go some really great places.
Yeah.
And, we grew up in a beautiful area. We didn't, we were outside all the time, all the time. I, when I say all the time, it was like all the
L-
time. It was like
Literally.
we
Yeah.
were
I know what you're
never
saying.
we were never inside. If we were inside, my mother would force us to go outside. She'd be like, "Go out and play."
Yeah.
You or, we'd say we were bored. She'd go, "We can't be bored, just go out and play. Go out and play or go help someone." That was her solution to being bored. You know, it was like
Go get busy doing something.
doing something, get creative, Um, it was just like there wasn't room kind of thing, for being bored.
Well, and so, I mean, the correlation to how things happened around our home, and because we had so many kids, I was the eldest of 6 children. um, the neighbors were all at our house all the time. We always had the biggest yard, just turned out that way. We had the neatest things going on in the back of one house. We had this rope swing that we could do Tarzan yells and jump off of a stone wall, and we had this huge rock. I mean, it was probably the size of a shed, an outcropping of a rock that was about 9 feet high and probably about 20 feet wide. Really beautiful. It kind of worked with the landscaping for it to be there. And so we'd climb on that rock and sit up on the top and we'd talk, just a bunch of kids just talking about different things. And for what, being around the more sophisticated older kids, like when I was 8 and 9 years old, the 12-year-olds would be talking about some new concept that they heard about it at school or on TV or something. Like, so one day we're talking about sex appeal, right? This is like 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and 11-year-olds. I mean, that don't know from nothing as far as what. And so we're talking about, okay, Sophia Loren. Oh yeah, she has sex appeal. And also the Queen of England, she has sex appeal. It was so fun, just dumb, stupid little conversations that just kind of left me with that feeling of the exploration in a group, those social environment. We didn't have chat rooms, we had a rock.
We had a rock, right? We didn't have a chat rooms, we had a rock. That's a very good line, Bill, but, it's true. I mean, we had the phone and then you had in-person conversation, and even the phone was not that, like, we were basically on the phone to make plans. Like, you would call to finalize a plan with a friend,
Oh yeah.
but we weren't on the phone talking on the phone to
No.
people. My mom did, to neighbors or to friends or whatever, but that was much more of an adult thing. That wasn't a kid thing.
Right.
Maybe until we got to be teenagers, and then I wasn't home anyway, because then, it was just the beginning where people, like, my friends who were teenagers had phones of their own in their rooms kind of
Right.
thing. And that was like a big deal.
Oh yeah.
And I remember being envious of, like, friends who had their own phone. It was kind of like, wow. But in general, you weren't on the phone. Like,
We
it just
went and saw
wasn't.
people. We hung out with the people that who we could walk to their homes, right?
That's right, or from school or something, but you know, you weren't doing using any form of listening device, let's say. I'll call it that. But
That
and
that changed when I started dating,
yeah, okay. That's understandable.
because my girlfriend always lived about 15 or 20 minutes away by car. So or lived in another state. It would be in Rhode Island when I was in Eastern Connecticut.
Mhm, mhm.
So there'd be the hours of that social contact on the telephone, but for the most part, they couldn't be hours. They might be a 20-minute call or something like that. But I completely agree with you from the standpoint of we didn't have something going on with people that we really couldn't be in the same room with, at
Mhm.
school or out on the playground, in our yards, in our neighborhoods and community. And that's who we learned how to play baseball with. That's who we learned how to play football with. That's who we rode around with bikes and pretended we were a bike gang.
Just yeah, it was different times. Fond
It is.
memories.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I enjoy being in the same room with people. The whole ritual of greeting and giving each other a hug, um, of being able to immediately appreciate the sound of somebody laughing and seeing them laugh, and the really good laughs always have a snort.
It's funny to me. It made me think of like families laugh the same.
Yes.
Like it's always funny, like and especially like it's happened to like a number of people in my family. Like, my brother, he was abroad. He
Yes.
laughed and somebody came up to him and said, "You must be related. You must be a Jeremias." And it was just like, it was so funny because it was a laugh. But what
Yeah.
you're saying really made me think that yesterday I said I went to make a Shiva call. And actually, I've spoken to my friend like quite often who I went to pay my respects to her mom and to support her. And but I don't know that I've seen her since COVID began. Like I don't know that I and just to be in the same room with her and give her a hug. And I thought to myself, I debated about going
Yeah.
because it wasn't around the corner. I mean, 2 hours and change in the car both ways. But then afterwards, like I walked in the door and she was like so floored to see me,
Yeah.
and I was so excited to see her, even during an occasion like that, that it was like you realize how much you miss people. Like it's just, and it's like I said, not like I've spoken to her, we've Zoomed um, over the past few years and a number of times.
Yeah.
But it's nothing like just being in the same room with somebody, and then all of a sudden, like, I got like, she got teary, but I got teary because all of a sudden it's kind of monument like, I wanna say the grandeur of it all, of how much I missed her, all of a sudden came into being for me. I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh my gosh, I've missed you so much," kind of thing.
So it's kind of neat. I'm so blessed, Jan, with the friends that I have. Uh, and Facebook is a really, really great way, to kind of share what's going on in their lives, not only from the sharing of memes and jokes and things that are satirical and what have you, but just the special little things that happen. And there's a guy who I used to watch when he was playing college basketball, back in the actually in the back in the 1980s. He was a very good basketball player. I never met him in person. I met a lot of the other players from that university and the team over the years, and somehow in the last I don't know, 6 7 weeks, we've become friends on Facebook, and we did all of our cheering for the Yukon Huskies and the Hun, all the rest of that. And well, this last weekend, there was a post that was put up. His wife had invited a half a dozen of his buddies, from where he grew up. And I want to say he grew up in Philadelphia. So they were all neighborhood boys that grew up together. They went their different ways and hadn't seen each other very much, probably in the last 10 years. And all of a sudden, all these men are in the same room with each other, and they're laughing and they're crying and they're hugging each other. And it was just so wonderful. No, you know, I'm sure they were saying words and, how are you doing? Oh my God, look at you. You got gray hair. It was it was amazing. Uh,
Well, and so one of the women that was there yesterday during the Shiva call was a woman I taught with. That's how I know this woman anyway, because we taught at the same yoga studio for many, many years and have done a number of workshops together. Really good. But there was another woman there who also taught there who I was friendly with, haven't really kept up with, but like, maybe once a year or twice a year. And she was there. And I didn't recognize her for a moment because she's totally gray.
yeah.
And once I kind of looked at her face, it was the same and everything. And she hasn't changed that much, but it was like all of a sudden I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, it was just the gray hair, and I know I'm more gray than, obviously. I
Yes.
mean, so, so it's just funny as we stand there and then all of a sudden you realize and you have that sometimes when you go to a family function and I'll be with my brother's family for Passover, which is next week. Not Yeah, next week. And at the end of the week. And it's always in my mind because my niece and nephew will be there with my nephew with his 5 and my niece with her 4. And I always think of them as being either little kids or, maybe in their 20s. And like my oldest niece is like 39. It's like, and I'm always like, how did that happen? Like, because I'm not that old that I should have a niece that's 39 years old.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, it's like, oh my gosh, like she's 39 years old. When my sister in law said that, I was like, what? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, her husband is 40. I'm like, 40? Really?
Well, to commiserate with you, this last week, my nephew Joel, who we babysat for after he was born, and when he was probably about 7 or 8 months old, until the time he was about 4, when my sister was working and would drop him off here, and then we'd take care of him all day. I changed him so many times. And he just turned 45. And my older daughter will be 45 in June. And it's just like, holy moly, you know?
Right. Right. And it's beautiful, but it's always so funny. So as you see people in person and then all of a sudden, and
Yeah.
it's nice when you see people like that. It's like, well, when you see friends like that, even sometimes more so than family for me, it's just like the history and um, because friendships are always different than family usually. So,
Yeah. Yeah. There's really, I think, kind of a last thought, because we're getting kind of
yes.
to that time, but a last thought in terms of everything that we've discussed today, is when you get a chance to interrupt your routine that you mindlessly go through, and you may or may not be getting some satisfaction out of it. However, there is always the opportunity to do things just a little bit differently. There's always an opportunity to do something different altogether. And there's always an opportunity to experiment and see if you can find some practices or hobbies, or maybe just different people to talk to on a regular basis that you can look forward to, that kind of like get you out of bed excited in the morning when you're going to go do this. And so I'm so silly with this yoga, you know. I'm equally silly with weighing myself, because I've been on this kick since last year. I'm approaching 40 pounds that I've lost since this time last year. So it's about being healthy. It's not about the number. But
Right.
my point is I like putting these little cookies out there in front of me, that they're little rewards, and they're little things that kind of spice the day up. And this podcast is one of them, and my
Oh,
other podcast is another one.
yeah. And I think that whatever that is for you, I've been running these workshops with a friend of mine. And so it's chair yoga, meditation, and then we always do some sort of creative project
Yeah.
that goes with that. And I look forward to, even though I'm giving them and we're doing them together, but I look forward to them because it really does feed a different part of myself that I don't necessarily feed. Um, and I think it really is good to mix it up. And so I'll go back, I'll end with this one nostalgic kind of thing. When I was a kid, Sundays were kind of like a day where we would explore, like we would take drives as a family and we would go to new places that we hadn't seen, or we would take a new way or whatever. And um, we would always give my father directions, and we would just tell him where to turn. That was like a thing. We would just say, okay, turn here, turn here, turn here. And we would explore new places, or maybe just take, like I said, different routes. But it was always very exciting
Yeah.
and just kind of fun to see different places than that we hadn't seen before.
Right.
Could be different towns, could be different areas, could be a different area of your state, could be a different neighborhood. It doesn't have to be far, explore. I mean, so much of the time, what's right in front of you, i- there's so much right in front of you that you haven't noticed yet.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, my wife got home yesterday about an hour earlier than she thought she would. So it was just about 3 p.m. And I said, "What do you think? Shall we go for a drive?" And it was raining. And she and I devised this game about 15 or 16 years ago with our riding around in our convertible. We called it the right, left, and straight game. And essentially, what that is, I think I've told you before, but essentially, what that is we get in the car when we come to an intersection, a stop sign or a stoplight. I look at her and I go, right, left, or straight. And she goes, whatever she says, she'll say,
Right.
right. And my answer to that is always, good choice. And we go. And so we did that for about 2 hours yesterday, just driving around, enjoying each other's company. And it was not only fun, and at the same time we had an opportunity to think of different things that we wouldn't normally be thinking of if we were just sitting here looking at our phones and our tablets and watching TV and doing our routine in the recliners. You know what I mean?
Oh, no, absolutely. I know exactly, and that is exactly what we would do with my dad. And my dad would pretend to get lost, which would never happen because my father it took me a long time to realize that my father had this great sense of direction, but he was a really good actor. And we would kind of say, "Okay, now get us home." And
Yeah.
he would make believe it was so challenging kind of thing, and, then all of a sudden realizing that it was never challenging. But even now, like, just going out and exploring, or like a few months ago I was going from my friend's house in Bloomfield up to Winstead, Connecticut. And it took me all these local roads through Canton and through, like, past these reservoirs I had never seen and stuff. And
Wow.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is like a half an hour from me,
It's about time you found out it was there, huh?
Exactly, exactly,
Good
exactly.
for you. Good for you. So, anything you want to say to kind of wrap things up and put a bow on the top?
Yeah, find someplace new in your own area. Like, take a bus somewhere you've never taken a bus to, if you take public transportation. You know, just explore, take a new road in the same route. Um, just see what you can find that's outside your window, in your own neighborhood, and see what that does to your week. See if it gives your week a little bit more pep, a little bit more variety, gives you something to look forward to, maybe for the following week, if you like it.
That is completely perfect. And I have absolutely nothing more to add to it,
Okay.
except for we are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I'm Bill Correll. And this is my good friend, Jan Jeremiah. Thank you so much, Jan.
Oh, thanks, Bill. Everybody have a great week.
You too. Bye bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.